can you turn in the Old Testament to Psalm 83? O God, do not remain quiet. Do not be silent, and, O God, do not be still. For behold, your enemies make an uproar, and those who hate you have exalted themselves. They've made shrewd plans against your people and conspired together against your treasured ones. They have said, come and let us wipe them out as a nation. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? That the name of Israel be remembered no more, for they have conspired together with one mind. Against you they make a covenant. The tents of Edom and the Ishlamites, Moab and the Hagarites, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, Philistia and the inhabitants of Tyre. Assyria also has joined with them. They have become a help to the children of Lot. Deal with them as with Midian, as with Sisera and Jabin at the torrent of Kishon. Who will destroy an Endor? Who became as dung for the ground? Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeeb, and all their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, let us possess for ourselves the pastures of God. O my God, make them like the whirling dust, like the chaff before the wind, like the fire that burns the forest, and like the flame that sets the mountain on fire. So pursue them with your tempest and terrify them with your storm. Fill their faces with dishonor, that they may seek your name, O Lord. Let them be ashamed and dismayed forever, and let them be humiliated and perish, that they may know that you alone, whose name is the Lord, are the Most High over all the earth. Thank you, Paul.
We have the prophetic word made fully confirmed, to which you do well to pay attention, as a lamp shining in a dark place, until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your heart. Knowing this, first of all, that no prophecy of Scripture came from someone's own interpretation. Those are the words from Peter, 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. We read through one of the more difficult psalms. It's an imprecatory psalm, and many of us are still not quite convinced that it's okay to pray that. Often we say, no, we don't want to pray those kind of prayers. We want to pray love and mercy and all of those kind of things, and that's wonderful. But here we have Asaph, a seer, who actually pleads for vengeance upon Israel's enemy. Yes, it is a desperate request for God's assistance during a time of conflict. Asaph, the seer here, is not just praying, he's also seeing something that had never occurred in his days, a multinational Arab alliance against the Jews. They were not the first anti-Semites. You got to go further back in time to people like Pharaoh or Haman or a whole host of people up to today. And really, we don't want to make a list of that. That's a sad list. But what we do see is that here the seer proclaims something very strong. Namely, that God, on the basis of covenant, will give his mercy to Israel. Because underneath all of this is the Genesis covenant. It's not because Israel is good in itself, but because God in Genesis 12 said, I will bless those who bless you. That covenant was proclaimed not just to Abraham, it was confirmed to Isaac and then to Jacob and to his children. And so God, on the basis of his word, on the basis of his covenant, on the basis of his faithfulness will stand against the enemy. Asaph is a seer. It's perhaps not the most common term for prophet, but it is a prophet nonetheless. 2 Chronicles 29:30 proclaims him as such. He's one of the authors of the book of Psalms. We often say it's by David, but this one and a few others are by Asaph, who initially served under King David and later on served under the next king, King Solomon. And so he was one of those really significant people that God placed there at that time. I don't know if you're like me and you're not very good at singing, you don't really grasp how significant his position was. You see, there is the king and there is the priesthood. But how do we connect to the priesthood? By doing what they do, and that's worship. And so he is highly significant, being the worship leader in what is initially the tabernacle and later on in the temple. And he's part of that team that dedicates in the 4th year of King Solomon the temple. This psalm is an imprecatory, that means I will curse, but also a lament. Where are you? God, we're crying out to you. And it is not just for our sake. These people are your enemy. They are those that hate you. Verses 2. If you come up against God, how do you do that? Well, you come up against the things that he loves, his people, his treasured one, his land, his possession. And so that's what we see here. They come up against his people. There's a simple outline, and there are 3 sections to this. There's the initial lament and the descriptions of the enemies, their evil intent. And note that that section ends on Selah. In verses 9 to 12, Asaph reminds the Lord how he has delivered his people in the past, and that related to the book of Judges primarily. And then verses 13 to 18, Asaph's prayer for their destruction, that curse that he placed upon them. But within that, he also prays for their repentance, that ultimately they may recognize Israel's God. And I think that's a good prayer for us. When people come up against us, that yes, we may pray against what they do, but ultimately pray that they may know the Lord. You see, God even loves those who hated him. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. And let's be honest, before we became a believer, we were, I'll leave you to fill in the blank. But I can only speak on my own behalf, and I was wretched and horrible, but I'll leave that to you. This psalm is a prophecy for today. At no stage in the history of Israel, during the biblical times, did this alliance that he described here this alliance was never in existence in biblical history. Yes, it's true that some 2 or 3 and perhaps even 4 of them came to in 2 Chronicles 20, verses 5 to 17. There, the men of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir came together against Judah. But never all 10. There were 10 tribes mentioned. And so this is a prophecy for time to come. And since 1948, these have now started to align themselves in one accord. Let me read to you some words from leaders from the modern age of these nation groups. President of Egypt, Gamal Nasser, on May 16th, 1967 that is, said, "The existence of Israel has continued too long. We welcome the Israeli aggression. We welcome the battle we have long awaited. The peak hour has come, the battle has come, in which we shall destroy Israel. The Syrian Minister of Defense, Assad, later on he would become the president, in May 20th, 1967 said, "Our forces are now entirely ready, not only to repulse any aggression, but to initiate the act ourselves and to explode the Zionist presence in the Arab homeland of Palestine. The Syrian army, with its trigger on the finger, is united. I believe that the time has come to begin a battle of annihilation." President Araf of Iraq, May 31, 1967, said, "The existence of Israel is an error which must be rectified. This is our opportunity to wipe out the ignominy which has been with us since 1948. Our goal is clear, to wipe out Israel from the map." The then chairman of the PLO, Sukari, said in an interview in June 1st, 1967, "Those who survive, who will remain in Palestine, I estimate that none of them will survive." He was talking about the Jewish people, and he assumed that none of them would survive. The deep-seated hatred is really from the enemy. It is not from them. And we need to pray that God will open their eyes, that they might know the Lord, that they may experience the same grace, because the Lord will come as a man of war and he will judge. We see that in Joel 3, for instance. So as we go through this psalm, I pray that you'll see that it's more than just a song, but it's a prophecy. It's a text of lament. It's an imprecatory psalm, a prayer, but ultimately it's a cry for help to the Lord. It's a shir, it's a song that they would have sung as liturgy. And as I said, it has those three sections. And so a request to God, a lament and a description. That first section, Asaph brings his lament before the Lord. "Lord, do not be silent." Sometimes God answers prayer immediately, but sometimes he says no, and sometimes he says wait. And sometimes it is the answer we don't like, and that's why Asaph here comes with his threefold repeat. Do not keep silent, do not hold your peace, do not be still. 3 times he prays that same prayer over and over. And we too can do that when God doesn't answer us at once. The enemies in response do what? They make an uproar, meaning that they're excited with violence within them, disturbance. They are going right against what God is doing. It's that foolishness of the leaders in Psalm 2. Yet the God of all the earth is standing there. Asaph notes them that they raise their heads against the Lord, really. It's self-exaltation. They make crafty plans together and consult. That's conspire together. That same language from Psalm 2. And they cut a covenant against his people. 10 tribes there come together. Asaph doesn't see them as his enemies. They're not his personal enemies, even though they come up against him. He sees them as God's enemies. They're working against God's plan and purposes for all nations. I think the words from Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2:11 fit right in there. Therefore God sends them a strong delusion that they may believe what is false. They would have known about the Abrahamic covenant, but chose to ignore it. God had warned them and sent them signs before. Remember Pharaoh. Even Pharaoh recognized it, that it had been done by the finger of God. Exodus 8:19. And yet willingly pursued them into his own doom. Exodus 14, when he tried to get into the Sea of Reeds. Remember Haman, after his wife even told him, if Mordecai before whom you have begun to fall is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but you will surely fall before him. And yet he pursues his goal, his desires. And so we need to know who this God is. And with Asaph, we can see in his psalm 5 of the names of God mentioned. We need to pay attention at that point. It's not just random names. It's not the same thing every time, though sometimes in some English translations it'll say 3 times God and 1 time Lord and 1 times the Most High. But there are subtle differences. Elohim, the God of creation. And so it starts off with all of them, verses 1 and verse 12. El, the God of strength or power, is emphasized. We see that in verse 1 as well. And it then occurs later on with Elyon, the Most High, for instance, in Genesis 14. He's not just the all-powerful one, but he's the creator of the universe who has with him all might. Elohai, verse 13. It emphasizes that he is the God of Abraham. Elohai Avram, Genesis 28:13. He is the God of his people. Elohei Avram, Yitzchak, for Yaakov, that's what we say. He is the shield about whom we have sung, and he will come to protect his people. God's personal name is mentioned, God's covenant name, verse 16 and 18. And here he is clearly identified as the true covenant keeper God. We can make an agreement, a covenant amongst ourselves to work against him, but he's already cut a covenant with his people. And Elyon, often translated as the Most High, but really the sovereign, the supreme one of the universe. It's in the Psalms and later on in Daniel that it's often used. What is God saying? When you oppose the God of Israel, oppose the people of this God, you're opposing the Creator, the Mighty One, the Exalted One, who made covenant and will fulfill his promises because he is faithful and he has the power and strength to do it. And so Israel and the nations should do what they are commanded to do, and is to hide in the shadow of his wings. And yet often, what is it that we do? We come against the people. I'm sure you noticed this, but the tents of Edom, where is Edom? Well, it's in Jordan. The Ishmaelites, well, Ishmael is the father of the Arab people as a whole, so that's in Arabia, Saudi Arabia. There's Moab, also in Jordan. The Hagarites, that is up in Syria. It's not Hagar, the mother of Ishmael. Yes, she was an Egyptian, but as a people, there were a tribe called the Hagarites. There was Gebal, which is in Lebanon. Ammon, we're back in Jordan. Amalek. Amalek was on both sides, in the Sinai and in Egypt proper, across the straits. There was the Philistines, the Philistia, that's the Gaza Strip today, and the inhabitants of Tyre, Lebanon. Assyria, that's modern-day Iraq. And they've been helped together by the children of Lot, which is again in Jordan, Selah. Verses 6 to 8. But when you paint that on the picture and you draw the map and you fill it in, what do you get? That blue little strip, that's Israel. All of those other countries, north, Lebanon, Syria. We have east, we have Assyria or Iraq, and Jordan and Arabia, and then south and going towards the west is Jordan and Philistia, the Philistines. This alliance never came together until 1967, when they came together with one accord and they made a covenant. No recognition of Israel, no negotiations, no peace. It was the three no's from Khartoum, if you want to do some research in that. And so this is the unholy alliance, the unholy covenant that they cut. The phrase, the tense of, which we see in this, means that's the people who reside there. And so in this map we can see clearly a closed circle around Israel. And so it's no wonder that Asaph prays, "O Lord, don't be silent." How much more should we, like the prophet, stand up and say, "Lord, do not be silent"? The names of the enemies is rather interesting because, Edom, southern Jordan, the Ishmaelites, Saudi Arabia, Moab, and central Jordan, the Hagarites, that's northern Jordan, but really southern Syria. Gebal is in Lebanon. Then Ammon in northern Jordan, Amalek in the Sinai and across into Egypt, and Philistia, the Gaza Strip, and Tyre and Lebanon. Those are significant people. God not just spoke here about them, but he spoke in a number of places about these people. And they are a part of the enemies. And so what is God going to do about it? Well, Asaph never saw the answer. But if you study the end times, you will. Because these people, they will all come or not be in the Messianic kingdom. Edom, they will undergo destruction and then desolation. Edom will become a waste place, a place for haunted jackals, for demons. Ishmael will undergo destruction. That's Kedar and Hazor in Jeremiah 49. There we go. Ishmael will undergo destruction. Moab undergo partial destruction because these are part of the people of Lot. And so they will get a part of their territory back that is covenantally promised to them. Yet they will undergo partial destruction and then a conversion and a partial occupation, and part of their land will be lost to Israel. The Hagarites, these were desert nomads that dwelt in the northern, but particularly in southern Syria. As a nation, as a tribe, they were already destroyed, 1 Chronicles 5, 19-23, but their territory now occupied by Syria. And the prophecy is more about the land than the people. The Hagarites will lose their land. That land will be occupied by Israel. Gebal in Lebanon will be occupied. Ammon in northern Jordan. Partial destruction, partial conversion. Because again, there's a connection to Lot, and they already had a covenantal promise from the Lord, and therefore they will not be wiped out completely. Amalek, as a tribe, they will be completely wiped out, but as a people, they will undergo a temporary destruction. Egypt will come back as a people, but the Negev and Sinai in particular will be occupied ultimately by Israel. Philistia will no longer exist. It will be occupied according to Amos 1. And then Tyre in Lebanon. It'll undergo occupation. The final one is Ashur or Assyria, which is primarily Iraq today and part of northern Syria. It'll undergo conversion. It's pretty amazing. You see, this psalm, he's asking God to move. And God, through the other prophets, says, I'm going to. Be patient. You see, we cannot be like, what was the name again in the Willy Wonka story, Faruka? I want it now. Now, Daddy, now. It's not right. Sometimes we just need to wait for God to move rather than stomp our feet. That's not godly behavior. God will move in His time rather than in ours. There is a recalling of the past, and we need to do that too. That's why we have in Hebrews chapter 11 those heroes of the faith. It's not just to have a list of names that are great, but to remember what happened to them. So too here, we need to remember what happened. And that's why here Asaph says, Lord, I remember. And he retells the story that he has from both Genesis and from Judges, from Chronicles. He's talking about all of these events that have happened. The petition is clear. Lord, remove them. You're the covenant keeper, God, and these are your enemies. Nevertheless, shine your light upon them that they may know. And Lord, I remember Midian. Remember Midian? Genesis 25. Midian became the father of the Midianites. And he's mentioned in Judges 7, where he is leaning on. Sisera, the commander of the Canaanite army of King Jabin of Hazor, mentioned in Judges 4 and 5, after being defeated by a woman, by Deborah. Jabin, that king, is also called the king of Canaan, who was overpowered. Judges 4, verses 10 to 16. Oreb and Seb, or Seab. By the time of the Judges, the Midianites were led by two princes. We see that in Judges 7, verses 20 to 25. And it's where Gideon then wins that victory at the rock of Oreb. He mentioned Zebah, Tzabach versus Salmunah, two kings who led the Midianite invasion of the land of Israel. Gideon defeated them in Judges 8. You see, we too need to recall events from the past and say, Lord, you did this. You were faithful then. We're going to continue to appeal to your faithfulness. God, let us inherit your land, your dwelling places. As he says in verse 12, let us inherit for ourselves the dwelling places of God. God dwells in that land. Ezekiel 48, the last verse, Jerusalem will be called the Lord who is there. God will dwell there in his time. And so it is a matter of not just praying for their destruction, but praying for their repentance, that they too may dwell with us. Asaph returns to this prayer, and he says, may they be as chaff before the wind, fire that burns the forest. May they have disgrace instead of honor. It's very strong language, but ultimately that they may come to know you. You might say, it's a wonderful psalm, but why are we looking at this in particular? Well, because I'm a little bit cheeky. I'm also doing a course in Revelation. And there I mentioned that there are events still coming, and this is one of those events. And from this event, this alliance, I believe it's a war that is coming, Israel will be victorious. They will come up time and time again until one day it is enough, until the people of Israel will be strong enough to overcome them. Initially, they came back as dry bones, but what then? then they became a mighty army, and they withstood this people. Have a look at this map. The orange is still the same. Those are those enemies that is mentioned in this psalm. In Ezekiel 38 and 39, you see new people being mentioned that are not in this at all. It's what is sometimes called the Ezekiel War or the Northern Alliance invasion. And they come to take the plunder, the war booty. What war booty? Well, that's probably from that previous Psalm, 83. You see, I believe that this is probably leading to that. Now, I'm not a prophet. I don't claim to be a prophet, and I work for a non-profit organization. Thank you. I'm glad that some of you got it. As such, I don't speak prophetically here, but I think it's likely that one leads to the other. And this is that other war. Now, if you have a standard Christian commentary, you will note that two of the places are very strange. Gomer and Beth Togarmah, or Togarmah. They are in a different location. They're normally in Armenia and Turkey. If you have the Art Scroll commentary, a wonderful commentary on the book of Ezekiel, you'll note that they say something different. And they say the son of Gomer in Genesis 10 is Ashkenaz. And Ashkenaz is Germany. And so that is likely to be those people that come in that place. And that would be then what we would call the Germanic people today. Beit Togarmah or Beth Togarmah is, according to Rashi, if I got that right, and you'll have to look at it, it's page 200 and something, I forget the page number. I didn't write it down, it's on my piece of paper, but it's not here, you'll forgive me. They say it's the people who live along the Seine, the river that runs through Paris, and that would mean France. And that would mean the Franks as a people. Well, the Franks actually continued even further south into Italy. If you take Italy with it, you've got that same circular motion again around Israel. If Ashkenaz is right, and I think it probably is, Ashkenazi Jews live from England to the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, all the way up there, even into Russia. But since Rosh is already mentioned, I'll leave those Russians alone for now. But you see, you then get that complete circle again. And I think there are two wars, two circles around Israel. The first one, Israel will defeat. The second one, God will have to step in supernaturally. It's not a war that they ultimately will fight. They will have to bury the bodies on the mountains of Israel for 7 months. They have to burn the weapons, in other words, destroy the weapons for 7 years. But that's something they can only do before the tribulation starts, because once the tribulation starts, you don't want to start destroying weapons. It is then that they believe that they live in peace and security. And yet ultimately will not have it because another king is coming, one who is far more ferocious. Friends, it is worthy for us to study these prophecies because, as Peter said, they don't come from men, they come from God. These two are linked in my sanctified imagination. Perhaps you see that as well. And therefore, we need to be like Asaph. O Lord, do not be silent. Do not keep your peace, but Lord, move. Lord, may they too today come to know Yeshua and his grace and no longer stand against you and your people and your land. Well, that's all I had to say about that. Selah.